Hello, welcome to this session on programming the Delphi's Open Tools API. I'm Girish Patil from Gnostice Information Technologies. In this session, I want to share with you some of the ideas we've got on how to be more efficient when working in the Delphi IDE. We'll also go quite deep into the implementation of some of the ideas that I put forth, and we'll be using the Delphi's Open Tools API to implement these ideas. Here's our plan for this session. We'll first understand the broad steps involved in programming with the Delphi Open Tools API. Then we'll look at the specific IDE extensions or the ideas that we are exploring into today. After that, we'll dive into the implementation of few of these ideas. Before we move ahead, I just want to touch upon the objectives of this session just once. We are exploring possibilities of working more efficiently. The little things that can make our life or our work easier. So the hope is that we'll get more ideas to take forward in this area. And while we do so, we will get to learn some new stuff, hopefully, about the Delphi Open Tools API, and also hopefully pick up some Windows programming skills. Now let's look at the general steps for creating an IDE extension. Let's switch to the Delphi IDE to do this. So first we create a new package like the one I've created here. Then we make sure that it's a design only package by setting the design time only option in the description tab. Then we add a new unit to this package which will hold the IDE extension that we are going to implement, and in that unit we would need to use the Tools API unit to get access to the interfaces and the tools that will help us add or interact with the Delphi IDE. And then we would register the extension through the register procedure by creating an instance of the class that we implement, and the rest should get taken care from there through the implementation of this class. So that's the really brief overview of creating an IDE extension. Now let's look at the ideas and come back for a deeper look into this. So here are the Delphi IDE extensions, or ideas of Delphi IDE extensions that we are going to look into today. You might think I'm a little crazy to be expressing the first one. It's actually a wish list that I have for the Delphi IDE, the code editor of Delphi IDE. Now let's understand this first. So let me just switch to a Microsoft application that I have open here. Now if I double click anywhere in the line, the word gets selected, and if I triple click or click 3 times at the same pace, then the whole line gets selected. And I would really like to see this in the code editor of Delphi. And also let me just show you just one more thing so you don't think I'm totally crazy. In fact, the creators of Delphi thought it was really important to provide an option to select a line by double clicking on a line. and they did this quite early in the evolution of Delphi. So it's not something odd to be expecting to be able to do in the IDE. But ideally, I would like to actually not have that option, but for it to work the way I showed in the Microsoft application. Okay, the next one is to be able to select or operate on a component without actually having to click on it to select it. So I want to basically reduce the number of clicks because if I had my triple click select all, I would really have my index finger numb. So I want to start reducing the clicks now. So the idea is to just move the mouse over the component and have it selected so that I can continue to operate with the keyboard in the object inspector. And the next one is to be able to change the property values without having to move back and forth between the component and the object inspector. So the idea is to have a pop-up menu that would show me or give me options to set some of the properties of the component. And the next one is to find a way to reduce the need to have to go between the component or the form designer and the tool palette to select components and drag them onto the form. The idea is to just have a pop-up menu showing us the component list, and we select from that to be able to place directly onto our form. Okay, so we're going to look at the implementation of 3 of them. We're going to leave the DoubleClick extension as a wish for now, because I would really like to see this implemented in the Delphi IDE itself, because it's too much of a hassle to have to do it as a IDE extension using the Tools API. So we'll just implement the last 3 items. Okay, let's switch to the IDE to see how, or first what this is about. So since I've installed the plugin already, I have the options to turn these extensions on. In this case, I'm going to select the auto select component option. If you see, as I move my mouse over the component gets selected automatically without me having to click on the mouse. And the advantage here is if I had my focus in the object inspector and I want to change a few of the properties of all the components, I could just use the keyboard for changing the properties, and then without moving the mouse too much or even clicking on it and clicking back and forth between the object inspector and the component, I could continue to work on the changing of properties using the keyboard and just switch between the components by hovering the mouse over the components. Okay, that was a simple plugin. I guess it can form the basis for something much bigger, and in this case it will, because our next IDE add-in is going to extend on this particular idea. Okay, let's go see how we implemented this particular add-in. Let me turn it off just to keep it clean. Okay, I switch to my code view. So to understand it better, we'll trace it through from the point that the IDE would actually execute this particular extension. So we implemented a class which has some stuff. We'll not worry about what it has right now. We'll just go into the constructor and see what is happening as we step through it. So in the constructor of our new class, we create a new menu item, set its basic properties, the caption, the on-click event handler of the menu item, and just set the initial state of the menu item to be unchecked. Once we have created the menu item, we access the Borderland IDE services global variable from the Tools API unit and access the main menu property and then the items of the main menu, and in this case the second item of the main menu, which is the edit menu. We get hold of the edit menu and add our new menu item to the edit menu by calling the add method on the menu item. And when we do that, we get the new menu item like we have over here. So once the menu item is inserted, nothing happens until the user clicks on the menu item. And for that, to handle the clicks of the user, we have set the on-click event handler, where we start to monitor mouse activity happening within the IDE by registering a Windows mouse hook. And in the mouse hook procedure, we look for mouse move messages, and then we call a method on our add-in class where we finally get hold of the designer form. To do this, we access the Tools API functions, and let's go see how we do that. So we have a routine implemented here which accesses the Borderland IDE services global variable again and casts it to the appropriate interface, and on that gets the current loaded module. From that we get the current editor, and from that we get the current form editor if one is currently active, and we can do that by calling the supports function by passing the current editor that we get to find out if it's a form editor. Once we have got hold of our form editor, we get the native interface of that editor, and then we well, actually, before we get the native interface, we get the root component, which is nothing but the form itself as an interface, and then we get the native interface of the form component, and finally we get it as a tCustomForm object by calling the getComponent method on the native interface. So once we have the form, we make sure, or we convert the points, the mouse points, to form coordinates from screen coordinates. Then we get the control that is under the mouse at that point, and if we have a valid control, we select it using another Tools API function. In this case, it's the select method on the appropriate component interface, which basically selects the component without actually setting focus to it. Yeah, that's basically it for this particular add-in. Now let's look at the next add-in that we have. So the next one is an extension of this particular add-in that we just saw. So what we want here is to be able to change some properties without having to move back and forth from the component to the object inspector. Now I have turned this particular extension on. Now let me just move over the component. As you can see, I get a small pop-up menu with some properties or properties of that component showing as options in the menu. Now if I want to change any of these any of the values of this property, I just need to click on the menu rather than having to go back and forth from the component to the object inspector. And also you will notice that the options that you see are relevant to the component that we want to operate on at this point. So the grid has an anchor property, enable property, and a visible property. So we are seeing those options only, whereas a checkbox has the check property as well. So we have an additional option for working with the checked or changing the checked property. And let me just select this, and you can see here that the check property just got turned on just by clicking on this menu, and I didn't have to go to the object inspector. So this can actually this idea can really be extended to something much bigger, where we have we can show a more graphical pop-up menu to change a lot more properties with just a click right next to the component that we are working with. Now let's see how we actually got this working. Let me turn this off and go into the code. So let's again trace it from the point that the IDE would actually start to execute it. So we have our class implemented, and we have a constructor where we initialize a few private variables. In this case, we have a timer just to have a delay before our form comes on, and then we create a menu item just like we did for the previous IDE add-in. We just give it a different caption this time, set the on-click event handler for the menu item, and then we access the Portland IDE services just like before and add the menu item to the edit menu. So here again, once the click takes place, we are registering the mouse hook to monitor all mouse move messages, and when the mouse move message, or when we receive a mouse move message, we again call the process mouse move method on the class that we implemented, and over there we do some new things here for this particular add-in. So we first get the component at the mouse point. That's the same way as we did before. Then so the initial state would be that the menu is not visible, or the pop-up is not visible, so it would go into this particular condition where the control was found, so it was not nil, and we set the result to true, and here we save the control that just got selected or the mouse was over, and then we start the timer to start off the countdown to show our pop-up menu. So once the timer fires, let's go find the on-timer event. So once the timer fires, we call show menu on our class, passing the point of the mouse, where we do some things to the pop-up menu, like clearing all the items in the menu that were there before, and then we populate the menu with the items. So the items are the options to change property values. So what we are doing here is we actually store a library of all the menu items that we implement, actually class references of the menu items. So we run through the list of all registered menu items. We access the class reference and we call a class method on that menu item class to check if that particular menu item should be shown for the selected component. So each menu item class that we implement for any particular property, we simply need to override the supports class method and just pass back whether the menu item should be shown for the component that is currently selected. In this case, we have the standard or the base class of this menu item class. We want it to be supported for all T-control descendants, so that's what we are saying, that okay, if it's a T-control, then let's show this menu option. If it is supported, then we create an instance of that menu item class, set the actual control to a private member of the menu item, and then we call a method to initialize the menu item just for the menu item to set its initial state, and then we add the menu item to the pop-up menu. Once we populate the menu items, we simply show the pop-up menu at the point that the mouse currently is at. Okay, so this is how the menu items get populated and the pop-up menu shows in the form designer. Now let's go see how those menu items were actually implemented. So we have a new class, a menu item class implemented, which has a private variable which stores the control that is currently selected, and we have introduced a new class method called supports, which takes in the component, which is the component that is currently selected, and returns true or false depending on whether this particular menu item is valid for the selected component. And of course, we are simply overriding the click method to actually perform actions when the menu item is clicked. So this is the base class for all our menu items. If we go and look at a specific menu item for a particular property, in this case, let's go see the menu item for the anchor property. So in the constructor of the menu item for setting the anchor property, we simply set the caption, and on the on-click event, rather the click method of the menu item, we access the control that is selected and set its anchors. The better way to do this would be to access the interface of that particular control so that the IDE gets to refresh itself immediately, like the object inspector will show the change immediately. Otherwise, you would need to just switch between the properties to actually see the values, the current value being reflected. Okay, let's see the implementation for the visible property, or let's actually look at the check property, because we want to see what we've done here in the overridden supports class method. Since the check property should be shown only for checkbox components, we have inspected the incoming variable, that is the A component parameter here, and made sure it is a checkbox, and we return true if it is. So when we populate the menu items, it will only show up if the selected component is a checkbox. So if we want to extend this, all we need to do is derive a new menu item from the base menu item class, just implement the constructor, the click, the initialize method, and possibly the supports class method. And one more step in actually telling the add-in that we have a new menu item to be shown. We have two special methods or routines which register the menu item into the class, into the menu item library that we have here, a global TList object. We simply add the class reference to this list, which is used by the populate menu items method, and we add the menu items or the menu item classes in the initialization part of the unit just by passing the class name to the register form design menu item, and they will get automatically removed when we clear our list object, so we don't have to worry about calling the unregister method. So that's how this particular add-in works. And like I said, a really nice implementation of this would be a more graphical menu where more options can be shown to change properties of the selected component. And also, if we are implementing new menu items, we would normally do it in a new unit so that we can put all our specific implementation in that new unit. Okay, so that was the Form Designer context menu IDE extension. Let's just see it working one more time. So now, if you can see, I don't have the anchor property set for the button. So let me just go here and set the anchor of the button, and you will see that once I've done that, all the anchors of the button are set. So if I want to confirm that, I can just select the button and you can see that the anchor was set, but the behavior on the resize was enough confirmation, I guess. And then for the checkbox, as we saw earlier, the checked item is only shown for this particular object and not for the other items. Okay, let's turn this off. And what's the next one? Yeah, I really like this one. It was actually the simplest one to get done, and I think it's the most, or probably will be the most used one among the three that I've just demoed here. Okay, let's just go see what it's about. So in the code editor, we press Control Space to bring up the code completion list box, and now in the form designer we can do the same. Press Control Space to bring up the form complete list box, and where we type the name of the component that we want and just press enter to get an instance of that particular component. So we saved ourselves of having to go back and forth from the form designer to the tool palette and type in the component and click on the component or press enter to get an instance of the component on the form. This is quite nice, I think. So the only thing probably missing here as compared to the tool palette is that the tool palette contains string search, whereas this one does starts with string search. So it can be extended a little bit to make it as good as the tool palette. And in fact, from the time I've had this working, I almost have stopped using the tool palette to select components. And another observation that I've made is that if you've taught yourself to type without having to look at the keyboard, interestingly, you use more brain power to use the mouse than the keyboard. Think about it. Okay, while you just ponder on that, let's switch to code and see how this particular add-in was done. So again, it starts off at the register method our register procedure, where we create an instance of our class, create a menu item, add the menu item to the edit menu, and in this case we also create a list box for showing our components list, and we set the events or the event handlers for few of the events for this list box. In this case, the key down and key press and the double click event handlers. So once we have done that, one more important point here for this particular menu item is to set the shortcut of the menu item to control space. So in the form editor, we will be now able to just press control space to get this particular components list. Okay, let's just see what happens in the menu item click. Show form complete list is what we call, where we call a function or a method to populate the components that are currently loaded into the IDE. We do that by accessing again the Portland IDE services global variable, casting it to the IOTA package services interface. Once we get hold of the package services interface, we run through the installed packages, all the installed packages, and in each of the installed packages we go through or run through the components in those packages, and we add each of those components by their names to the list box, or actually our list that we have here, which is the string list of the list box. You can see that here. We have passed the items property of the component list box that we are going to show when control space is pressed. So once the list box is populated, we get the current position of the mouse. Then we just make sure that the window is not already visible. Then we call this special Windows function to actually pop up the list box without having to parent the list box to the form, or without even having to set its visible property, and also make it just float in the form designer area and not be restricted by the form's boundary. Okay, then we just set focus to that window and let the list box events do the rest. Yes, so when we get an enter key being pressed on the list box, we simply add the component through another Tools API function, actually at the default position in this case, onto the form, and then we hide the list box. So this was actually really simple to get done, but it's, I think, a really useful IDE extension. Alright, so that completes the implementation of our the ideas that we had for IDE extensions. Now, if you want to explore more into this, you should really look at the Tools API unit to understand more of what it contains, and also to get a starting point or to get some basics. You can look at the GExperts website. You can use this code freely in your at your company or wherever you use Delphi. To get hold of this source code, please go to the Gnostice website. That is www.Gnostice.com/CodeRage.asp. The special page set up for CodeRage. You can get the source code from this page. Thank you very much. I hope we learned something new and got some new ideas for Delphi IDE extensions. If you want to contact me, you can make note of this email address. Thank you.